It's been more than 10 years since my gastronomic travels have brought me to this particular island. But on my tour of capital cities, how could I ignore Britain? And as you can see from this magnificent specimen of Victorian architecture, sorry London, I've chosen Edinburgh. Despite what Glaswegians may tell you, Edinburgh is the capital city of Scotland and home of its national parliament, recently reinstated after nearly 300 years of English rule. Known as the Athens of the North, it is a beautiful and a dramatic city, thanks to its classic architecture built on a series of volcanic hills and glacial valleys. Edinburgh is a vibrant, cosmopolitan city, a bit like me, a fascinating mix of old and new. The Royal Mile is the heart of Edinburgh. At one end is the Palace of Holyrood House, the Queen's official residence in Scotland, and I've decided to set up camp at the other end, in a slightly less modest residence, Edinburgh Castle. There has been a castle perched on the remains of this volcanic crag for over 1,000 years, and wherever you are in Edinburgh, it dominates the skyline. Despite its long history, it is still a working castle with a garrison manned by Scots regiments. The castle is also famous for its 1 o'clock gun, originally a daily time signal for ships in the Firth of Forth, and now it signals lunchtime for the workers of Edinburgh. But today, it's also acting as a rather elaborate kitchen timer. I've chosen two very simple, very quick dishes today because this gun goes off at 1 o'clock and we have to have cleared the premises by 1 and we can't come back afterwards. So, Scotland is famous for its scallops. I do one steam dish. In these shells here, I'm putting some spinach leaves on the bottom, then some finely shredded leek, then some ginger, then some red and some green chilies, a little teeny weeny bit of garlic, then 2 scallops, some spring onions, and then some basil, and then finally some more red pepper. Or it's nearly chili, it's red pepper really, and a few little bits of tomato. That's it. Now, Sean, my assistant, is going to finish doing off all of those while I start the next, more traditionally Scottish version of cooking scallops, which I ripped off from the Athol Hotel where I ate last night, although that will have been months ago when you see this. So, some mashed potato, which I've mashed with butter and cream and egg, and into that we're putting some raw chopped leeks. Like so. Stir that in. Then some little lardons of fried bacon. And then we'll mix that up really well together. Right, form one of these into a little basic potato cake, like that. I'll pop it down there for a second, and I bring into play my highly sophisticated cooking machine. Fire that up. That goes on there. And that goes in there to cook. How are you getting on, Sean? Absolutely splendid. I can take those now. Now we'll pop these into the steamer. 1, 2, 3, and 4 into there. The lid onto that. Now, meanwhile, in here with a very hot pan, we just whack those in. So we just sear these scallops extremely quickly. Now the residue heat from that pan will cook those things quite happily. So they can go over there for the second. Meanwhile, we'll make some sauce with some butter and some lemon juice and whisk it until it's amalgamated. And into that we tip some chives, very finely chopped chives. Then that's our leek and potato cake. Our scallops go around that. There. That should go on there. So that all round. For the pack shop, we'll clean off the edges of the plate. Phew, I've finished. It's nearly 1 o'clock, And before he pulls the trigger, there's just time to show you these two dishes made with succulent local scallops. One steamed with spinach, ginger and peppers and garlic in the Asian fashion, and the other pan-fried and served with a leek and potato cake and a sauce of butter, lemon juice and chives. So, brace yourselves. Oh! Oh dear, that was a bang. Anyway, it's 1 o'clock and it's time for a dram. The 1 o'clock dram, as we call it. Do you know there are over 2,500 brands of Scots whisky? There are over 120 varieties of single malt whisky, and in the course of research for you, last night I sat alone in my hotel room and I got as far as 17. So now I'll continue my research. I had a good time on the Orkneys a few years ago, so I'll try the Highland Park. It's smooth, warming and quite delicious. That's good. I've only got another 101 to try. Cheers. Edinburgh has given us the telephone thanks to Alexander Graham Bell, Sherlock Holmes, courtesy of Arthur Conan Doyle, the best James Bond, alias Sean Connery, and the biggest arts festival in the world. Ah, Floyd on the Fringe. Now there's a thought. Mention traditional folk dancing to your average Englishman and they'd run a mile, trying to get away from the men with bells tied around their knees, waving hankies and banging sticks together. But up in Scotland, the traditional ceilidh is still a great night out enjoyed by all. And it's easy to see why. If you look ceilidh up in the dictionary, it says it's an informal gathering for dancing, conversation, music, stories and songs. In other words, it's a euphemism for a bloody great booze-up. The Scots certainly know how to have a good time, but since my kilt's still in the wash, I think I'll sit this one out. Enough of that. Time to move on. Game is a favourite in Scotland, so I've travelled north of Edinburgh to sample the sporting life. The secret to successful shooting is keen eyesight, quick reactions, a steady hand, and above all else, a really nice outfit. And I'm glad I'm not the only one who came dressed for the part. For those of you who might be against blood sports, I can tell you that tramping across the heather in this magnificent part of Scotland is breathtakingly beautiful. It's quite awe-inspiring. We've in fact walked about three or four miles. We haven't seen a bird yet. It's always the same with us. Bring a television crew along and thousands of birds that normally here disappear. But Spruce is out looking and we just stand and wait now. And maybe she'll point and we'll get something for lunch. The countryside around here is perfect for grouse, who are fussy eaters and will only dine off the young shoots of heather. This is the Atholl estate. At 150,000 acres, it's probably one of the largest private estates in Scotland. Around the world, people can't wait for the 12th of August, the start of the grouse season. But you're about as likely to find a grouse calling the 12th glorious as you are a turkey singing, "I wish it could be Christmas every day." About 4.5 hours, I don't know how many miles, a few false alarms, and no grouse. I'll tell you one thing, the old expression of romp in the heather has taken on a whole new meaning since I took up grouse shooting. Anyway, the only grouse I'd like to see tonight is in this glass. Cheers. Normally, we'd have expected to bag at least a couple of brace on a shoot like this, but in recent years there's been a decline in the number of grouse. The protection of birds of prey means there are more predators, bad weather for the past few years, overgrazing by sheep, and heather mismanagement have all contributed. Still, a great day was had by all, and there's more than one way to bag a grouse. Luckily, you don't have to rely on a successful day's shooting to get game in Edinburgh. If what you're after has got wings or hooves on it, it's probably hanging up here somewhere. A traditional game dealer's and butcher shop like this is truly a cook's dream. Wonderful teal, woodcock, partridge, grouse, pigeons, rabbits, hares, the whole lot is here. It's fabulous to see it. And by the way, these are hanging here. They're on display. They're not being hung in the sense of making them rotten or anything like that. These days, the idea of hanging game doesn't go on any longer than for 4 days in a cold environment, just to tenderize them and let the flavor come out, as much as you might do with a good sirloin of Scottish beef, for example. In former times, yes, they were hung up in the cold room simply because there was no other way of preserving them. But today, they're just hung for about 4 days, and then they're plucked, cleaned, and sold. And since I absolutely failed to shoot any, I've got no choice but to buy a couple. So I've got my birds, and what better place to cook them than at the Dunkeld House Hotel, originally the home of the Dukes of Atholl. Whereas I love eating virtually everything, one of my genuine favourites is game. And here in Scotland, you've got the wonderful opportunity of especially grouse, of pheasant, of wild duck, of deer, all kinds of things. And another thing about cooking I like very much is roasting. There's something primordial about sticking something in an oven, making it very hot, roasting it, and serving it with its juices. And that's what I'm going to do. First, here, I've got some wild duck. Now, underneath them, I've made a mirepoix. That's coarsely chopped up root vegetables, carrots, celery, leeks, onions and stuff like that, which I've fried in butter to make a bed for the birds to sit on while they're roasting. Equally, I've fried the birds in butter just to seal them and then put them on the vegetables with some thyme and rosemary. And now they're going to go in the oven. Some people say that a wild duck should simply fly through the oven, but I don't think they should be served absolutely raw, not at all. So that goes in for the ducks. Same with the grouse, go into the oven. That's good. Right, now here I've got some butter in here. Let that get up to frying speed. In the meantime, here I have a lovely selection of wood mushrooms. You can use any kind of wild mushrooms you like. They're much better than just the ordinary champignon de Paris, the little white cap ones we buy in the shops. These are really nice. Just roughly chopped, some of them whole, and stick them into there. And let them cook gently away in butter. Now, here I've got some breasts of pheasant, which I'm just going to saute gently in butter. While they're just taking colour, I'll take a little colour myself. Very agreeable. Now, you flip these over. And as usual with all meats, don't season them until they're sealed. Otherwise, the salt in particular will draw out the juices which you want to keep inside the flesh itself. Okay, now that the pheasant is nicely sealed on both sides and pretty well cooked, I'll flame them in Calvados. I'll give them a bit of a birthday. And then to cool them down a little, we'll add a bit of cider. Now, so they don't stew and get tough, we'll just put those to one side and keep them warm. While we let that sauce reduce very slightly. Now, as that reduces, I will now add some cooked apple, sort of an apple sauce with that, and stir that around and let that simmer. Now, as they say, in the best television programs, or they used to say, now here's one I prepared earlier. In my case, we never do that. So why don't you have a nice loving look at either this applesauce or the grouse in their feathers while I let the birds in the oven cook for the next 15 to 20 minutes. Yeah, good. There the grouse. Beautifully roasted, beautifully flavoured with these vegetables. Pop that over there. Then we give them a birthday. Like the pheasant had a birthday, these are allowed to have a birthday. And they're going to have a birthday with Whisky, as you will see. Just to get the This isn't just to make it look pretty by setting fire to things. It does help us get all the juices out of the wonderfully caramelised vegetables and the grouse itself. Right. We take the grouse out, place them onto our serving dish, pour that juice over our wild mushrooms, and then add some basic red wine sauce, which you can, of course, buy from supermarkets in those little cartons, and you might just as well, as long as you remember to use the pan juices from the roasting. In the meantime, we have to worry about our ducks, which I've got over here. Took them out earlier because they were cooked. Lovely juices underneath the mirepoix vegetables. What I'm going to now do is just flame them. They are going to be kirscht, which is some kind of fruit alcohol. This helps us to get all the remaining juices out and mix it with the roasting juices from the vegetables as well. Now put the ducks onto platters. I'm going to make two different sauces. One is a black cherry sauce. Strain in some of the roasting juices first of all, and then add some of my red wine sauce and let that reduce down. Similarly, with the kumquat sauce, I've just got the little baby oranges simmered in white wine and sugar and cinnamon, and now I'll add some white wine stock and reduce that a little further. So you can see all this really beautifully. What I'm going to do now is what we say cut, and I'll assemble them as if we were going to serve them to our guests. Cut. So, one wild duck with a black cherry sauce, another wild duck with a kumquat or an orange sauce, breast of pheasant with an apple and calvados sauce, and a brace of grouse roasted and served with a wild mushroom and red wine sauce.
This hotel is right on the banks of the River Tay, and perhaps I have a bit more luck by the river than I had out on the moors. I wonder what time the fishmonger opens. Following its decommission in 1997, and after fierce competition about which city should be its final port of call, the Royal Yacht Britannia came here to Edinburgh. For 44 years, this majestic ship served the royal family as transport, a place to entertain, and an escape from the public eye. The Queen regarded it as the only place she could truly relax. And although the Royal Yacht is one of the most famous ships in the world, until recently very little was known about what it was like inside. And the Royal Galley has got to be the perfect place to cook the king of fish. No pun intended.
Since we're on the ex-Royal Yacht Britannia, I thought we'd do a rather grandiose dish, the king of fish, for the Queen of the Empire, as she should be still. Some wonderful salmon baked in phyllo pastry and stuffed with, as you can see here, or will be, crystallized ginger, sultanas, and lime. So the first thing I must do is spread the salmon with some little pieces of ginger, then some sultanas, and then some little slices of lime, okay, like so, and then some little knobs of butter. Right. Then we put the other piece on the top there, brush it with a bit of melted butter and some lemon juice, and now a fairly tricky bit. Well, tricky because I've had this pastry out a bit too long, really, under the lights. Just brush the excess flour off. Onto there like that. Mixture of egg and milk to paint the whole of the pastry case with egg wash, so it gets a nice golden colour when it gets into the oven, which is where it's now going to go. Right, my second dish is a gratin of mussels in spinach and a cheese sauce. So, firstly, I've got my spinach here, straight into the pot with only melted butter, no liquid at all, because spinach contains so much liquid, it just doesn't need any. And this way, you get the really good full flavour of the spinach.
We'll just stir those round, let it cook very gently. Then into my other pan here, where I've got just onions, garlic and parsley and melted butter, we tip in the mussels, give them a quick stir, and then we'll put this frying pan in as a lid, and when the shells are open, we'll unshell them and carry on with the rest of the dish. I am personally not ashamed at all. When I find a good quality convenience food in a top supermarket, I'm quite happy to use it, and I've done it here. This is a 4-cheese cream sauce that I bought from one of the better supermarkets these days. And it is very good too. But just to make it even a bit better, I'm going to add a little bit more cream to it. So that's that. Very pleased about that. Now, my spinach, as you can see, perfectly cooked, goes onto the bottom of our dish. And because spinach is quite salty, you don't need to add any salt to this dish at all. That's fine like that. Then tip in the mussels, round like that, and then pour over my cheese sauce. And to make it even nicer, in my view anyway, because I love cheese, I'm going to add a bit of grated mozzarella. Like so, and then, quite simply, whack that under the grill till it's A, warmed through, and B, turned golden. So there, Scotch salmon stuffed with ginger, lime and sultanas, and this other dish, Scots mussels baked with spinach and a cheese sauce. Absolutely delicious. The only time I don't like Edinburgh is when I'm up here and Scotland beats England at rugby. But apart from that, it is a fascinating city. It's a very cultured city. It's a stylish city. The architecture is very impressive indeed. There are good bars, there are good restaurants, spectacular things to visit. And it's not at all true that that nasty Glaswegian man said you'd have more fun at a Glasgow funeral than you would at an Edinburgh wedding. That's simply not true.